My daughter-in-law, Jessica, announced she was bringing 57 of her relatives to my house for Christmas. She took the wedding portrait of my late husband and me from the mantel, said it looked too dated for a fancy party, and then told me I'd be the one cleaning up her mess afterward. She didn't just want my house. She wanted to erase my life. Have you ever looked at an old object and seen a whole lifetime in it? For me, that was our wedding photograph, sitting in its heavy silver frame, pride of place on the mantelpiece above the fireplace. It had been there for 40 years, a silent witness to the entire story of our family. That frame had seen my husband, David, carry our son, Liam, in from the hospital, a tiny bundle wrapped in a blue blanket, smelling of baby powder and new beginnings. It had watched over countless Christmases, its glass reflecting the twinkle of colored lights on the tree. It saw the flicker of birthday candles, year after year, as our boy grew from a toddler with chubby cheeks into a lanky teenager who towered over me. It was there for the tearful goodbyes when Liam left for college, and the joyous hellos when he came home for the holidays. David and I, we were frozen in that photo, forever young and beaming, standing on the steps of a small country church on a sunny afternoon in June. His hand was resting so gently, so securely on my waist, and my head was tilted just slightly toward his, a silent promise captured on film. I could still remember the scent of the gardenias in my bouquet and the feel of David's thumb stroking my hand just before the photographer told us to smile. That picture wasn't just a decoration, it was the cornerstone of this house. It was the anchor of my memory. It was the proof that we had existed, that we had loved, that we had built something that was meant to last. But what happens when someone comes along and tells you that your lifetime is dated, that it needs to be put away because it clashes with the decor? Before we get to that, though, wherever you might be listening from, I'd ask you to do an old woman a small favor. If you could find it in your heart to like this story, or maybe leave a short comment below, it helps more than you know. It helps my story be heard. Thank you. Thank you kindly. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, unannounced. That was Jessica's way. The world revolved around her schedule, her whims, and the rest of us were just expected to fall in line. I was in the kitchen, a place that had always been my sanctuary. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating the flour dust that hung in the air like a fine mist. I was kneading dough for a pumpkin loaf, my hands moving in a familiar, rhythmic motion that I could do in my sleep. The scent of cinnamon, nutmeg, and clove filled the air, a warm, comforting smell that always meant autumn was truly here in North Carolina. Through the window over the sink, I saw her sleek silver car pull into my driveway. It looked like a spaceship that had landed in a field, utterly alien against my humble brick rancher and the old oak tree whose leaves were just beginning to turn brilliant shades of orange and red. When I opened the front door, a gust of cold November air swept in, but the real chill came from her. Jessica stood on my porch, wrapped in a beige cashmere coat, the kind that costs more than my monthly mortgage payment used to be. She looked flawless, cinematic, and so profoundly out of place on my simple, lived-in porch with its slightly peeling paint and pots of sleeping geraniums. She wasn't here for a visit. You could tell that right away by the determined set of her jaw. She was here to make a proclamation. "Carol, dear," she said, breezing past me into the foyer, her voice tinkling like wind chimes made of glass. She didn't call me Mom anymore, just Carol. It was a subtle shift that had happened over the last year, a small but deliberate distancing. She peeled off her leather gloves, finger by finger, her eyes scanning my living room with a critical air. "I've made a decision." She spoke about my home as if it were a banquet hall she had just rented for an event. I just stood there, my hands still sticky and fragrant with dough, feeling a profound sense of dislocation. My own home. She had just commandeered it with the casual authority of a queen requisitioning a peasant's cottage. 57 people. The number was so specific, so absurdly large, it sounded like an invading army. I pictured strangers spilling through every room, their voices echoing off walls that had only ever known the quiet rhythm of my life with David and the sound of Liam growing up. A cold draft seemed to snake around my ankles, even though the front door was now firmly shut. She walked a slow circle around the living room, her gaze sharp and appraising, like an auctioneer sizing up lots for a sale. She ran a manicured finger over the edge of my bookshelf, checking for dust. She tapped a long painted nail against the porcelain lamp David had bought me for our 10th anniversary. Nothing seemed to please her. Her eyes were searching for flaws, for things that didn't meet her impossibly high standard. Then she stopped in front of the fireplace, in front of the mantel. She pursed her lips, a small, tight knot of disapproval. She said, the sound dripping with a condescending sort of pity. "This picture." She gestured with her chin toward the wedding portrait. My heart gave a little lurch, a painful throb against my ribs. "It just looks so dated. It really kills the vibe for a classy party. It throws off the whole room." Before I could form a single word of protest, before my mind could even process the monumental audacity of what she was saying, she reached up, her movements quick and decisive. She lifted the heavy silver frame off the mantelpiece. For a fleeting, hopeful moment, I thought she was just examining it, perhaps admiring it. But then she turned and placed it face down on a nearby end table with a careless thud. The sound was small, but it reverberated through the silent room like a gunshot. It was an act of such casual cruelty, it took my breath away. Each word, each action was a deliberate cut, dated, kills the vibe, throws off the room. She wasn't just talking about a photograph. She was talking about my 40-year marriage. She was talking about my memories. She was talking about David. In that single brutal gesture, she had dismissed my entire life as an inconvenience to her party planning. I felt my chest tighten, a physical ache spreading from my ribs, making it hard to breathe. The spot on the mantel where the picture had stood for 4 decades was now stark and empty. It looked like a fresh wound. It was a void. "There," she said, dusting off her hands as if she'd just completed a difficult and unpleasant chore. "That's much better." She turned to me then, a bright, artificial smile plastered on her face, but her eyes were as cold and hard as river stones in the winter. "Oh, and after the party, you'll need to handle the cleanup. It's going to be a bit of a mess, I'm sure, but you have so much free time on your hands, don't you?" And in that moment, I ceased to be the matriarch of my own home. I had been demoted. I was now the housekeeper, the hired help. Her request to clean up wasn't a request at all. It was an order, a casual confirmation of my new, diminished status in her eyes. An invisible old woman, useful only for scrubbing away the remnants of other people's ambitions. The smile never left her face, but the message was clear. I was no longer in charge here. She was. Liam came by a few hours later, probably summoned by Jessica to smooth things over, to manage the fallout. My hands were still trembling slightly as I tried to explain what had happened. My voice felt thin, reedy, like a stranger's. Liam, she took down the wedding picture of your father and me. I looked into my son's eyes, desperately searching for a flicker of outrage, a spark of the fierce protectiveness he used to have as a little boy who would stand between me and a barking dog. I saw nothing, just a deep, weary sigh, the sigh of a man burdened by what he saw as petty domestic squabbles. "Oh, Mom," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Jessica just wants everything to be perfect. Don't be so sensitive. It's just a picture. We'll put it back up after the party." It's just a picture. Those 4 words hurt more than anything Jessica had done. They were a deeper betrayal. My son, the boy David and I had raised in this very house, the child whose every scraped knee I had bandaged and every small victory I had celebrated, could not see the profound disrespect his wife had just shown. He couldn't see that she hadn't just moved a frame, she had tried to erase his father. She had tried to erase me. In his rush to defend his wife's ambition, he had become her accomplice. I had never felt so utterly, completely alone. That night, long after they had both gone, I sat in the silent living room. The house felt vast and empty around me, its usual comfort replaced by a chilling sense of alienation. The blank space on the mantel seemed to pulse in the dim light, a constant throbbing reminder of the violation. I finally got up, my joints aching with a weariness that went bone deep, and walked over to the end table. I picked up the photograph. My fingers traced the cold glass, gliding over David's smiling face. He looked so handsome in his tuxedo, so full of hope and love. With a slow, deliberate movement that felt both heavy and sacred, I walked back to the fireplace and placed the photograph exactly where it belonged. It wasn't a loud act of defiance. There was no one to see it. It was a silent oath, a promise I made to David, to myself. This is my house. This is my life. And no one has the right to erase it. Jessica had planted a seed of contempt that day. She had no idea that in doing so, she had also planted the seed of my resolve, and she was about to reap a harvest of truth. The deep loneliness I felt that night reminded me of the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. The whole world had just stopped. The streets were empty. The silence was deafening, broken only by the mournful sound of ambulance sirens in the distance. I was here, in this house, completely alone. The walls that had always felt like a warm embrace suddenly felt like a cage. I saw Liam and Jessica and my grandchildren only through the cold glow of a computer screen, their faces pixelated and distant. This house became my sanctuary then, my fortress against the invisible virus raging outside. It kept me safe. It was my whole world. I had survived a global pandemic in these 4 walls. I had faced down fear and isolation and come out the other side, stronger in some ways, more fragile in others. I would not be defeated by a different kind of sickness, a toxic bloom growing right inside my own family. The strength that saw me through that solitude, I knew as I stared at David's smiling face that I was going to need it again. Working as a nurse for 40 years teaches you one thing above all others. The most dangerous symptoms rarely scream. They whisper. A veteran nurse learns to read the silences between breaths, the subtle shifts in a patient's gaze. I remember a patient once, a man in his 70s, recovering from a simple pneumonia. All his charts looked good, his vitals were stable, but I noticed that when he thought no one was looking, He'd press a hand to his side with a tiny wince. It was nothing, a flicker of a movement, but it was enough. I insisted on another scan. The doctors found a small hidden abscess that could have turned septic. That little observation probably saved his life. After the day Jessica took down our photograph, I started to apply that same diagnostic lens to my own situation. I began to ignore her sugary words and focus on the clinical signs, the symptoms of her behavior. My mind, trained to observe and analyze, started asking questions. Why did she need to impress an investor in my modest home, instead of a fancy restaurant or a country club? Why specifically 57 people, a number so large and precise, it felt less like a family gathering and more like a corporate event? And why did she feel so supremely confident, issuing commands in my house as if her name were on the deed? My nurse's intuition, the gut feeling that had saved patients more than once, was screaming at me. There was a malignancy growing somewhere in the dark, and I needed to find it. A few days later, the first clear symptom presented itself. The mailman came, a cheerful man named Frank who always had a treat for the neighborhood dogs. I sorted through the usual pile of junk mail and bills on the hall table, and there it was. A thick, cream-colored envelope. It felt heavy, important. My name wasn't on it. The addressee was Mrs. Jessica Foster, but the address was unmistakably mine. A jolt went through me, cold and sharp. My heart skipped a beat. The short walk from the front door to the kitchen table felt like a mile. My hand was trembling slightly as I held the envelope. I knew I shouldn't be prying, but my eyes were drawn to the return address. It was from a major bank, one I didn't use. And through the little cellophane window, I could make out a few words printed on the letter inside: real estate appraisal documents. My breath caught in my throat. I carried the letter into the kitchen and set it on the counter, the smooth paper feeling icy beneath my fingertips. I stared at it as if it were a venomous snake coiled on my granite countertop. Here it was, a symptom I couldn't ignore, a piece of evidence that couldn't be explained away as me being too sensitive. I didn't open the letter. I didn't have to. A sudden, chilling memory surfaced, and I knew exactly where to look next. I walked upstairs to the small office where I keep my important papers, my movements stiff and robotic. I opened the bottom drawer of the old wooden filing cabinet, the one that always sticks, and pulled out a folder labeled Trust Documents. Jessica and Liam had brought them over a few months ago. This time, I didn't read the documents as a trusting mother. I read them as an investigator, a nurse searching a patient's chart for a fatal error. I scanned past all the flowery language about safety, protecting my assets, and simplifying my estate for the future. I was looking for the fine print, the hidden clauses, the poison pills, and then I found it. A single sentence, buried on page 4, dense with legal jargon that was designed to be overlooked. It granted the trustee, Jessica, full and irrevocable power to manage, mortgage, and dispose of the property herein. Full, irrevocable, mortgage, dispose of. The words hammered against my skull. They weren't just legal terms. They were the sound of a jail cell door slamming shut. I had signed it. My own hand, my own signature, at the bottom of the page. Dazzled by their smooth talk and assurances, I had willingly signed away my home. I had signed the death warrant for my own life as I knew it. I sank into the creaky office chair, the papers trembling in my hand. The memory of that day came flooding back with sickening clarity. I remembered how Jessica had sat right here, in this very room, explaining everything so smoothly, her voice a polished, reassuring purr. She used terms like revocable living trust and asset protection, words I didn't fully understand, but that sounded so safe, so professional. "This will just make things so much easier down the line, Carol," she'd said, patting my hand. "It avoids probate, saves on taxes. It's what all savvy people do these days." And Liam had just sat beside her on the little sofa, nodding and smiling, a placid look of absolute faith on his face. "Jessica knows what she's doing, Mom," he'd said, his voice full of pride. "She's the expert." Now, replaying those words in my head, they sounded entirely different. They weren't words of reassurance. They were part of a carefully rehearsed script, lines in a play designed to lull me into a state of false security. My trust, the unconditional love a mother has for her child, had been weaponized against me. A wave of helplessness washed over me, so powerful it almost made me sick. I felt foolish, old, and utterly alone. But then, through the fog of despair, a name surfaced. Sarah, my best friend from high school. We hadn't seen each other much since she moved to the other side of the city, but we still exchanged Christmas cards. Sarah had worked as a paralegal for the same law firm for over 30 years. She was smart, no nonsense, and someone I knew I could trust implicitly. My hand was shaking so hard I could barely dial her number. She picked up on the second ring. "Sarah," I said, my voice cracking. "It's Carol Foster. I need you to look at some papers for me. I think I'm in terrible trouble." Hearing the raw panic in my voice, Sarah didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Carol, you get over here right now," she said, her tone firm but kind. "I've got a fresh pot of tea waiting for you." For the first in days, a tiny, fragile flicker of hope ignited within me. Sarah's house smelled of old books and chamomile tea, the scent of safety and wisdom. She sat at her heavy oak dining table, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, and read through the documents I'd brought. She read them once, then a second time, her brow furrowed in concentration. The silence in the room stretched on, broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall. Finally, she took off her glasses and looked at me, her eyes filled with a deep, sorrowful pity. "Oh, Carol," she said softly, "this isn't a trust fund to protect you. This is a durable power of attorney. You've given your daughter-in-law the legal right to do anything she wants with your house. Sell it, take out a mortgage against it, whatever she decides, and it's all perfectly legal. Your signature is right here." The truth, spoken so plainly by a friend, was somehow more brutal than reading it myself. I just sat there, my hands wrapped around a teacup that had long gone cold. The malignancy had been diagnosed, and it was stage 4. I drove home from Sarah's house feeling like I was moving through water. The world outside my car window seemed blurry and unreal. Every word she had spoken echoed in my head. "It's legal, Carol. She has all the power. Your signature is here." It felt like a verdict, a life sentence. On the way, I passed the park where David and I used to take Liam to feed the ducks when he was a little boy. I could almost see them, a ghost of a memory on the grassy bank, David lifting a giggling toddler up to his shoulders. Now, that same boy was an accomplice, allowing his wife to steal the very home filled with those memories. The pain of betrayal was a sharp, physical thing, worse even than the fear of losing my house. Jessica may have lit the match, but Liam's willful blindness was the gasoline she was pouring on the fire, incinerating the sense of safety I had spent a lifetime building. That evening, I tried to talk to him one last time. I didn't mention Sarah or what she'd told me. I tried to be calm, rational. I approached it gently. Liam, I said, finding him scrolling on his phone in the den. I was reading over those papers again. There are some clauses in there about mortgages. I'm just not comfortable with them. I think we should have an independent lawyer look at them. He didn't even look up from his phone. Mom, we've been over this, he said, his voice laced with an irritation he didn't bother to hide. You don't understand business law? Just let Jessica handle it. She's the professional. In his voice, I heard the finality of his choice. I wasn't his mother seeking reassurance. I was an annoyance, a roadblock on the glittering highway to the future Jessica had promised him. I was a problem to be managed, not a mother to be cherished. I felt like I was drowning, the water closing over my head. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in the old armchair in my reading nook, the one with the worn floral pattern, and stared into the darkness. My house, usually a place of comfort, felt like a cage. My eyes fell on a book lying on the side table, one a friend from my old book club had given me. It was by Brene Brown. I picked it up and flipped through the pages aimlessly, my mind a numb haze. Then, a sentence jumped out at me, underlined by my friend. Courage starts with showing up and letting ourselves be seen. It hit me with the force of a physical blow. That's what Jessica was trying to do. She was trying to make me disappear. She took down my photo. She ignored my words. She belittled my concerns. She was rendering me invisible. And my silence, my heartbroken acceptance, my retreat into grief, it was helping her. I had been letting her erase me. The quote wasn't about being fearless. Courage, Brown wrote, was about taking action despite the fear. It was about showing up when all you wanted to do was hide. It was about finding the strength to be vulnerable, to stand in your truth even when your legs are shaking. Those words were like a splash of cold, clear water on my face. I couldn't change Liam's mind. I couldn't reason with Jessica's greed, but I could change my own response. I could stop being a victim. I would not let them see me broken. I would let them see me, yes, but they would see something else entirely, something they never expected. I stood up, my back straight, and walked into the kitchen. I filled the kettle with water and set it on the stove. The low hiss of the gas burner and the gentle rumble of the water beginning to heat were the only sounds in the quiet house. And in that moment, I made a decision. If Jessica wanted a performance, a show for her investor uncle, then I would give her one. But this would be my production, and I would be the one writing the final act. The next morning, I picked up the phone and called Jessica. I took a deep, steadying breath and donned my new mask, the sweet, slightly confused, and utterly agreeable mother-in-law. I even practiced in the hall mirror for a moment, softening my gaze, letting my shoulders slump just a little. "Jessica, dear," I said, injecting a note of cheerful resignation into my voice. "I've been thinking about it, and you're right. I'm getting old. It's time I let you younger folks handle these big decisions. You go right ahead and plan your party. I'll help in any way I can." I could hear the smile of triumph in her voice. It was unmistakable. "Oh, Carol, I knew you'd come around," she chirped. "You really are the best mother-in-law a girl could ask for." I kept my own voice even and pleasant, even as my heart hammered against my ribs like a war drum. The performance had begun. After the call, I grabbed my purse and car keys. I didn't drive to the grocery store or the library. I drove downtown to a big box electronics store. I walked past the giant gleaming television screens and the rows of shiny new smartphones. I found the aisle with security equipment and recording devices. I looked at all the options, my mind sharp and focused. I chose the smallest one they had, a tiny digital voice recorder, no bigger than my thumb. The young man at the checkout counter gave me a curious look, an old woman buying a piece of spy tech. I just offered him a gentle smile. He had no way of knowing that sometimes the most modern tools are needed for the most ancient of reasons: to protect one's home, to defend one's family, and to reclaim a piece of one's own life. Jessica began to visit more frequently after that, treating my house like her personal event space. She'd arrive with swatch books and catalogs, talking about renting different furniture just for the party and rearranging my living room to improve the flow. I played my part to perfection. I became the forgetful, doting old woman she wanted me to be. I'd ask the same question about the menu 3 times in a row. I'd accidentally misremember the name of the caterer she had just told me. I'd nod vaguely at her ideas for floral arrangements. "Oh, that sounds lovely, dear," I'd say. "I don't know the first thing about these modern styles. You just do what you think is best." Each silly question, each moment of feigned confusion, was a brushstroke on the masterpiece of my performance, lulling her deeper into a sense of absolute superiority. While she was busy measuring the drapes, her back turned to me, I moved with a quiet purpose she would never have suspected. I took the tiny recording device and tucked it deep inside the soil of a large Boston fern that sat on a table near our old landline telephone. The spot was perfect. The fern was lush and overgrown, its fronds providing a thick green canopy. That plant had been in that corner for 20 years, a silent witness. It was about to find its voice. I knew Jessica was too smart to say anything incriminating in front of me. I had to give her a reason to feel safe, to believe she was alone. I needed to set the stage. A few days later, while she was over again, I let out a theatrical sigh and pressed a hand to the small of my back. "Oh, Jessica," I said, my voice sounding weary and frail. "This old back of mine is acting up again. I have a physical therapy appointment tomorrow afternoon. I'll probably be gone for a few hours. If you need to come by to take more measurements or make some calls, just let yourself in. The spare key is under the ceramic frog." I saw a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. "That's perfect, Carol," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You just go and take care of yourself. I was actually hoping to come by to make a few calls to the caterer and the rental company. The reception is so much better here than at our place." The bait was cast, and the fish, blinded by its own arrogance, swam right for it. The next day, I actually went to my physical therapy appointment. I went through the motions of the stretches and the heat pack treatments, but my mind was a million miles away. It was back in my house, in my living room, with Jessica. I kept glancing at the clock on the wall, each tick of the second hand stretching into an eternity. The therapist's voice was a meaningless drone in my ears. I was replaying scenarios in my head. What if she found the device? What if she decided to make her calls outside on her cell phone? What if this all blew up in my face? The fear was real, a cold, heavy weight in my chest. But then I thought of David's face in our wedding picture. I thought of Jessica's dismissive sneer, I thought of the words dated and losing your mind, and the fear was burned away by a cold, hard resolve. I had no other choice. This was a path I had to walk to the end. When I finally got home late that afternoon, my heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The house was empty and quiet, just as I'd left it. I waited until dusk had settled, until the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the lawn. When I was certain no one was coming back, I went to the fern. My hands trembled as I reached into the damp soil and retrieved the little device. I took it into my bedroom, closed the door, and plugged in a pair of earbuds. Holding my breath, I pressed the play button. At first, it was just rustling sounds, the creak of a floorboard. Then I heard Jessica's voice, crisp and professional, talking to a rental company about tablecloths and champagne flutes. My stomach churned. And then she made another call. Her voice changed completely. The sweet daughter-in-law persona vanished. This new voice was sharp, metallic, and dripping with smug calculation. "Don't worry," she said to the person on the other end. "The old woman is completely snowed. Signed the power of attorney thinking it was a trust for her cat or something. Once I lock in the deal with Uncle Robert on Christmas Eve, this house becomes our working capital." The sound was so clear, it felt like she was whispering the poison directly into my ear. I felt a wave of nausea. I had to pause the recording, my hand trembling as I fumbled with the tiny button. I took a few deep, ragged breaths before I could continue. The person she was talking to must have asked something about me, because Jessica let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound completely devoid of warmth, like ice cracking. "Her? Oh, please," she said. "She's a senile old woman, obsessed with her dusty old memories." I had to take down this hideous wedding picture she had up. After this deal goes through, she should be thanking me for freeing her from this pile of junk. It wasn't just about the money. She truly despised me. She saw my life, my love, my home, everything I held sacred, as garbage to be cleared away for her convenience. This little recording wasn't just evidence of fraud. It was a perfect recording of a cruel and hollow heart. I sat there in the dark, the earbuds still in my ears, the tinny echo of her voice still ringing in my head. Her words were like acid, eating away at the last vestiges of any hope I had for my family. Listening to her, I have to wonder, have you ever felt that? Have you ever poured your whole life into something, a family, a home, a career, only to have someone else dismiss it all as worthless? If you have, I'd be grateful if you shared a little of your story in the comments below. It helps to know you're not the only one. The next morning, the fear was gone. Jessica's raw contempt had been a clarifying fire, burning away all my doubt and hesitation. All that was left was a cold, clear sense of purpose. I knew I couldn't fight this alone. I sat down at my computer, the one Liam had set up for me years ago, so I could email the grandkids, and I typed into the search bar, "Elder Fraud Attorney, North Carolina." A list of names and firms appeared on the screen. I ignored the flashy ads and looked for the reviews, for comments from people like me. I found a firm in the city, one with dozens of positive testimonials, praising the lawyers for their compassion and their tenacity. I picked up the phone, and this time my voice was steady and strong. "Hello," I said. "I need to make an appointment. I believe I'm the victim of financial fraud." The law office was on a quiet, tree-lined street downtown. The inside was paneled in dark oak and smelled of leather and serious intentions. It was a world of order and consequence, a stark contrast to the emotional chaos of my life. I sat across a large, polished desk from a lawyer named Mrs. Davis. She was a woman in her 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a patient, calming presence. She listened to my entire story without interruption, her gaze never leaving my face. I told her everything. I started with the so-called trust fund and ended with Jessica taking my wedding picture from the mantel. My voice didn't waver. I laid out the facts as clearly as I could, just like I used to deliver a report to a doctor at the end of a long shift. Finally, I reached into my purse and placed the small digital recorder on the desk between us. "And this," I said, "is my proof." Mrs. Davis didn't question me. She simply picked up a pair of headphones, plugged them into the device, and pressed play. I watched her face as she listened. I saw her expression shift from professional attentiveness to surprise to a quiet, simmering indignation. When the recording finished, she removed the headphones and set them down carefully. She looked at me, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt truly seen. "Mrs. Foster," she said, her voice firm and resolute, "you are not senile. You have been systematically deceived. What your daughter-in-law has done is not just unethical, it's illegal. We can help you." Hearing those words, "we can help you," felt like a physical weight being lifted from my shoulders. Someone believed me. Someone was on my side. The crushing loneliness I had been carrying for weeks began to recede. I was no longer fighting this battle alone. Mrs. Davis began to map out a strategy, her voice crisp and efficient. "First," she said, tapping a pen on a legal pad, "we send a notice of legal action to all involved parties, including the bank that's appraising your home. That will freeze any and all transactions immediately. Second, we prepare a lawsuit to have the power of attorney invalidated based on clear evidence of fraud. And third, and this is the most important part," she paused and looked directly at me, "we choose our moment to strike, the moment of maximum impact." My mind immediately flew to the Christmas party, the grand stage Jessica was so carefully constructing to celebrate her victory would now become the very place where her crimes were exposed to the world. A cold, determined smile touched my lips for the first time in a long time. I walked out of that law office and took a deep breath of the crisp December air. The world looked the same, but I felt transformed. The despair that had been my constant companion was replaced by a sharp, focused sense of purpose. I was no longer a victim waiting for the next blow to fall. I was a plaintiff, a fighter, actively seeking justice for myself. On the way home, I did something I hadn't done in years. I stopped at a shoe store and bought myself a brand new pair of Skechers, the memory foam kind I'd been eyeing for months. It was a small, simple act, but it felt monumental. As I sat on the little bench to try them on, I felt the cushioned sole support my tired feet. It was a tangible sensation of being held up, of having a solid foundation again. It was a quiet declaration that I was worth taking care of, that I deserved comfort, and that I intended to be walking on my own 2 feet, in my own home, for a long time to come. In the days that followed, I worked closely with Mrs. Davis's office, providing them with every document, every email, every detail I could remember. At the same time, at home, I continued my performance as the docile mother-in-law. I even helped Jessica choose the linens for the party. "Oh, this deep red is beautiful, dear," I'd say, holding up a napkin. "So festive for Christmas." Jessica would smile, pleased with my compliance, completely oblivious. While she was choosing the colors for her web of lies, I was with my lawyer, choosing the words for her indictment. The party was drawing near, and I was ready. Mrs. Davis and I both knew that a lawsuit would take time. To stop Jessica in her tracks, to dismantle her plan before it could come to fruition, we had to target its weakest point, its linchpin, Uncle Robert. He was the audience. He was the investor. He was the entire reason for this 57 guest charade. If Robert walked away, Jessica's scheme would collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. But the question was how to approach a wealthy, powerful businessman without sounding like a crazy old woman consumed by jealousy of her daughter-in-law. The move had to be precise. It had to be subtle. It had to be unimpeachable. I found Robert's email address on an old business card Jessica had left on my kitchen counter weeks ago. I sat in front of my computer for hours that night, the screen glowing in the dark room, composing and deleting, writing and rewriting. I wrote a long, emotional draft, pouring out all my pain and betrayal. I deleted it. It sounded weak. I wrote a short, angry draft, full of accusations. I deleted that too. It sounded unhinged. I had to remove myself, my feelings from the equation. I had to think like a businesswoman, not a heartbroken mother. The final email was short, professional, and to the point. The subject line read, "Regarding the Foster Properties investment." The body of the email was just 3 sentences. "Dear Mr. Miller, my name is Carol Foster, Jessica's mother-in-law. I understand you will be attending the Christmas party at my home. There are certain details regarding this investment opportunity that I believe a prudent investor such as yourself would want to be aware of before making any commitments. Would you be willing to grant me 15 minutes of your time in private before the party begins? Sincerely, Carol Foster." I read it over one last time, my finger hovering over the mouse. This was the biggest gamble of all. If Robert was the kind of man who blindly trusted his family, he might forward the email directly to Jessica. My entire plan would be exposed. I would lose the element of surprise. The only real weapon I had. Taking a deep breath, I clicked send. The silence that followed was deafening. Every ping from my computer made my heart leap into my throat, but it was always just junk mail or a notification from a news site. All through the next day, I checked my inbox compulsively, my anxiety growing with each passing hour. The lack of a response was worse than an outright refusal. I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was naive. Why would a man like that listen to an unknown old woman? He probably deleted it without a second thought, dismissing it as family drama. By late that night, I had almost given up hope. I was getting ready for bed, my shoulders slumped in defeat, when I decided to check one last time. And there it was, a new email in my inbox. The sender, Robert Miller. My heart hammered against my ribs as I clicked it open. The message was even shorter than mine. "Mrs. Foster, your email has been received. I will arrive 15 minutes early. I look forward to speaking with you. RM." I read it 3 times, the words glowing on the screen. He had ordered, he had agreed. The seed had not only been planted, it had taken root. A surge of adrenaline, hot and powerful, coursed through me. The gamble had paid off. The very next afternoon, Jessica stopped by, her face radiant with excitement. "Carol, you won't believe it," she gushed. "Uncle Robert just called. He said he's so looking forward to the party. He even said he's going to come a little early to get some extra time to chat. Everything is going perfectly. She suspected nothing. In Jessica's world, she was the master manipulator, the smartest person in any room. She was the one pulling all the strings. It was inconceivable to her that another force could be moving silently in the background, that the chat her uncle was looking forward to was not with her. Her own arrogance was her greatest blind spot. For my meeting with Robert, I didn't prepare emotional speeches or bring my little audio recorder. Mrs. Davis's advice was clear. Speak to him as a fellow stakeholder, not as a victim. Present facts, not feelings. Give him data, not drama. We prepared a simple, one-page summary of the power of attorney fraud, complete with copies of the key documents and the bank's appraisal letter. I would not be playing the part of a poor, helpless old woman. I would be presenting myself as the legal owner of an asset under threat, providing due diligence to a potential investor about a high-risk, fraudulent deal. Christmas Eve arrived on a wave of gray, cold North Carolina sky. Outside the world was bleak, but inside my house, a frantic artificial cheer was being manufactured. A catering team I'd never seen before swarmed through my kitchen, their voices sharp and unfamiliar. Strangers were moving my furniture, hanging glittering decorations that felt cold and foreign. Jessica swept through the rooms like a conquering general, issuing orders to everyone, including me. Carol, these champagne buckets need more ice. Now. I moved through the chaos with a quiet calm, an island of stillness in the center of her storm. I did as she asked, my movements measured and deliberate. She had no idea that the real storm had yet to make landfall. My house no longer smelled like home. The familiar scents of old books, lemon polish, and baking were gone, choked out by the cloying aroma of Jessica's expensive perfume and the foreign smells of fancy appetizers being prepared by the caterers. It was the smell of deceit. Everything was perfectly arranged to mask an ugly truth. A magnificent Christmas tree blinked with 1,000 tiny lights in the corner, but the beautifully wrapped presents beneath it were empty of love. Smooth jazz played from hidden speakers, but the mellow notes couldn't drown out the frantic drumming of my own heart. This was Jessica's stage, built on a foundation of betrayal, and I was the stage manager, holding the script for the final, unchangeable scene. Jessica was wearing a sheath dress of brilliant, fiery red. It fit her like a second skin. She looked like ambition made flesh. She glanced at me, dressed in my simple cream-colored wool sweater and gray slacks, and a look of faint pity crossed her face. "Don't you have anything a little more festive, Carol?" she asked. I offered a small, placid smile. "This is what I'm most comfortable in," I replied. Comfortable. It was a word she would never truly understand. She could wrap herself in designer clothes and fill a room with expensive things, but her soul, I suspected, would never know a moment of genuine peace. The guests began to arrive, a flood of 57 strangers pouring into my home. They brought with them expensive bottles of wine and bright, meaningless smiles. They oohed and awed over the decorations, over the house itself. "Oh, Jessica, your home is just beautiful," one woman gushed. "It's my mother-in-law's," Jessica would reply, with a smile that clearly implied, but not for long. I stood in a quiet corner of the room, observing it all, feeling like a nurse watching a patient's fever climb higher and higher, knowing the crisis was imminent. I glanced at David's old grandfather clock in the hall. The hands pointed to 6:40. 15 minutes. Robert would be here any moment. My palms were damp. Excusing myself, I slipped out the back door onto the screened-in porch. The cold air was a welcome shock, clearing my head. From here, the sounds of the party inside were muffled, a cacophony of laughter and clinking glasses. They were drinking wine, eating prosciutto-wrapped melon, and celebrating Jessica's imminent success. They had no idea they were partying on the deck of the Titanic. Standing there alone in the cold, I wondered how a place that had been my sanctuary for so long could feel so alien. What does your home mean to you? Is it the one place in the world you feel truly safe? I'd love to hear what home means to you in the comments. At precisely 6:45, a long black sedan pulled silently into the driveway. A tall man with salt and pepper hair and a well-tailored overcoat emerged. Uncle Robert. He didn't head for the front door. His eyes scanned the property and found me on the porch. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and began walking around the side of the house, away from the noise and the lights. The plan was in motion. "Mrs. Foster?" he asked, his voice low and courteous as he reached the porch steps. "I'm Robert Miller." I gestured to the old wicker swing. We sat, the cold December air swirling around us. The sounds of the party inside seemed a world away, a faint, tinny echo. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Miller," I began, my voice even and clear. I had rehearsed this. "I won't take much of your time. I only wanted to ensure you had all the relevant information before making any financial decisions tonight." I didn't talk about the wedding picture. I didn't speak of my broken heart or my son's betrayal. I followed Mrs. Davis's script. I presented the facts, concisely and without emotion. "Mr. Miller, this house, where we are sitting, is my sole property, purchased with my late husband from a lifetime of savings. Several months ago, I was fraudulently induced into signing a durable power of attorney, granting my daughter-in-law full control over it. This party has been orchestrated to impress you, with the ultimate goal of leveraging this property as collateral for an investment loan." I handed him the slim folder Mrs. Davis had prepared. "In here, you will find a copy of the power of attorney, along with correspondence from the bank regarding the home's appraisal. My attorney has already sent a notice to block any transaction, but I felt you should be aware of the true source of the capital Jessica intends to present to you." Robert took the folder. He didn't speak. He simply opened it and began to read, his face illuminated by the yellow glow of the porch light. As he read, I saw the polite social mask of a party guest dissolve, replaced by the sharp, cold, assessing gaze of a serious businessman. When he finished, he closed the folder and looked me directly in the eye. "Mrs. Foster," he said slowly, each word deliberate, "I am sorry that you have had to endure this, and I thank you for bringing it to my attention. I have a zero-tolerance policy for unethical business practices." He stood up and extended his hand. "You've done a very brave thing." I took his hand. His grip was firm, respectful. It felt like a pact. "So," I asked, my voice barely a whisper, "what will you do?" A thin, knowing smile touched Robert's lips. "I'm going to do what any smart investor would do. I'm going to go inside, enjoy the hors d'oeuvres, and listen to Jessica's presentation with great interest. You can trust me." Robert walked around to the front and entered the party, where he was immediately enveloped by Jessica, who proudly began introducing him to her relatives. No one had noticed our brief meeting. I remained on the porch for another minute, taking one last deep, steadying breath. 15 minutes. 15 minutes of unadorned truth had changed the entire trajectory of the night. I had armed the one person Jessica couldn't afford to have as an enemy. Now, all I had to do was wait for the show to begin. About an hour later, Jessica picked up a champagne flute and tapped it gently with a spoon. The clear, ringing sound cut through the chatter, and a hush fell over the room. "Everyone, can I have your attention, please?" she said, her voice bright and full of energy. "Thank you all so much for coming to celebrate Christmas with our family." Liam stood beside her, beaming, his eyes shining with adoration for his wife. I stayed near the back of the room, by the doorway, my heart beginning to pound a steady, heavy rhythm. The moment had come. "I especially want to give a huge thank you to my wonderful mother-in-law, Carol," Jessica continued, gesturing grandly in my direction. A few people clapped politely. "Thank you, Carol, for lending us your beautiful, cozy home for this memorable party." Lending. The word was so carefully chosen. It implied my generosity while subtly demoting my ownership. I simply nodded and smiled, my mask still firmly in place. "And now," Jessica said, her voice shifting into a more serious, professional tone, "the main reason we're all here tonight." She began her pitch. She spoke of a unique investment opportunity, of undervalued properties, of massive potential returns. The room was silent, captivated. Jessica was in her element, polished, persuasive, and completely in control. She was on top of the world. Just as she was about to turn to her laptop to begin a slideshow, a calm, authoritative voice cut through the air. "Jessica, one moment." Every head in the room turned. It was Uncle Robert. He was getting to his feet, a thoughtful expression on his face. "That was a very compelling introduction. But before we go any further, I think it might be beneficial for you to explain to the family a few documents that have recently come into my possession." Jessica's smile froze on her face. It was like watching a film suddenly stop on a single frame. "Documents? Uncle Robert, what are you talking about?" At that exact moment, the doorbell rang. Before anyone else could move, a dazed-looking Liam went to open it. And standing on the threshold, silhouetted against the dark night, was Mrs. Davies Ardevasai. She was holding a leather briefcase, her expression calm and resolute. She stepped inside. "Good evening," she said, her voice carrying easily through the silent room. "My name is Eleanor Davis. I'm the legal counsel for the owner of this property, Mrs. Carol Foster." A collective, silent gasp seemed to suck the air out of the room. 57 pairs of eyes swiveled from Jessica to Mrs. Davis, and then finally to me, the quiet old woman standing by the door. Jessica sputtered, her face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. "A lawyer? Mom, what is this? What have you done?" She looked at me, her eyes no longer filled with contempt, but with pure, undiluted panic. Liam just looked lost. "Mom," he pleaded, "what's going on?" Uncle Robert simply stood with his arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with the detached interest of someone who had already read the end of the book. Mrs. Davis stepped forward and placed her briefcase on a table, clicking open the latches. "I'm here," she announced, her voice clear and strong, "to clarify a few points about the investment opportunity Miss Foster has just presented." The stage was set. The final act was about to begin. "First," Mrs. Davis said, her voice cutting through the tense silence, "I'd like for everyone to hear a brief audio recording." She produced a small portable speaker from her briefcase and pressed a button. Suddenly, Jessica's own voice, sharp, smug, and cruel filled the living room. The old woman is completely snowed. Once I lock in the deal with Uncle Robert on Christmas Eve, this house becomes our working capital. A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd. Then the next part of the recording played, the part where she laughed. She's a senile old woman, obsessed with her dusty old memories. I had to take down this hideous wedding picture. The room fell dead silent. The festive atmosphere evaporated, replaced by the ugly, naked truth. Jessica's face had gone chalk white. She turned to Liam, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. He just stared at her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and profound hurt. The dawning horror on his face was terrible to watch as he finally connected all the dots, all the times I had tried to warn him. He then looked at me, and for the first time in a very long time, I saw shame and regret in his eyes. Jessica's 57 relatives just stood frozen, whispering amongst themselves, their gazes shifting uncomfortably. Uncle Robert simply shook his head in disappointment. Jessica's carefully constructed stage had just collapsed beneath her feet. Mrs. Davis continued, her tone matter of fact. She explained the fraudulent power of attorney. She presented the bank's appraisal letter, sent to Jessica at my address. She stated clearly that all necessary legal actions had been taken to protect my asset and that a criminal complaint for fraud was being filed. Every word was another nail in the coffin of Jessica's ambition. There was no way out. When Mrs. Davis was finished, I took a slow step forward from the shadows by the door. I didn't look at Jessica. I looked at my son. I tried to tell you, Liam, I said softly, my voice filled not with anger, but with a deep, weary sorrow. But you wouldn't listen. I then turned to the stunned crowd of strangers. This house, I said, my voice growing stronger, was built with love and hard work. It is not an asset to be leveraged. It is not a line item on a balance sheet. Finally, my gaze landed on Jessica. She was trembling now, tears streaming down her face, but I felt no pity. Only a vast, empty sadness for the ruin she had brought upon herself. I took a deep breath, feeling the full ownership of my home, my life, settle back into my bones. You wanted a perfect Christmas party, Jessica, I said, my voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight of authority. Well, here it is. I paused, letting the silence hang in the air. Now, I would like for everyone who was not my immediate family to please leave my house. For a moment, no one moved. Then, Uncle Robert turned without a word and walked out the front door. That broke the spell. One by one, couple by couple, Jessica's relatives began to file out, their eyes averted, their expensive gifts left behind. They scurried away like mice from a sinking ship, leaving behind a room full of untouched food and a silence heavy with shame. In the end, only 3 of us were left in the cavernous, silent room. Me, Liam, and Jessica. The aftermath felt like a battlefield after the cannons had gone silent. Trays of cooling food, half-empty glasses, and the garish red decorations seemed to mock the ruin of the evening. Liam sank onto the sofa and buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He tried to say something. "Mom, I'm so sorry." But the words were choked and broken. Jessica just stood in the middle of the room, utterly broken, a statue of shattered ambition. I walked over to the fireplace, to the empty spot on the mantel. I knew that tomorrow I would go upstairs to my bedroom where I had hidden it for safekeeping, and I would bring my wedding photograph back down. I would polish the silver frame and set it right back where it belonged. The wound was still there, of course. It would take a long, long time to heal, especially the one between my son and me. Forgiveness is not a single act, but a long, hard road, and I didn't know if we could ever walk it together again. But tonight, in the wreckage of Jessica's ambition, one thing was certain. This house was mine again. Its quiet corners, its sunlit kitchen, its memories, they were all mine. I had faced the sickness in my own family, and I had not let it consume me. I had found my voice. I had shown up. And this life, this beautiful, complicated, precious life, was mine. That empty space on the mantel became a strange sort of mirror. For weeks, it had reflected back all my fear and invisibility. But now, standing here in my quiet, reclaimed home, it reflects something new, a quiet strength I didn't know I still had. You know, I feel like when we sit down together like this, the stories just flow like a stream. Today, I've opened my heart to you, and now I would be so honored to listen to yours. You see, sometimes just a little tap on a screen, a like, a subscribe, or a share might seem like a small, fleeting gesture, but to me and to other quiet voices that need to be shared, each one of those taps is a tiny light in the darkness. It's a quiet way of saying, I see you, I hear you, your story matters. It reminds me that we are not invisible. A simple click from you is a powerful statement of support for me, and it gives me the encouragement to continue sharing these stories. After telling my story, something has shifted in me. For weeks, all I wanted was for someone to hear me. Now that you have, I realize that what I want most is to hear you. Down below, in that comment section, I would be so honored if you would share a piece of your story with me. Tell me about a time you felt unheard. Tell me about a passion others sometimes dismiss as silly. Or tell me about a moment you found your strength, even in the smallest, most quiet way. I will read them. I will carry them with me. Because your story, it matters. We want to build Sapphire Revenge into a community where we can share these stories from the heart. I know you have your own private stories, ones that are sometimes hard to share with family or friends. I am here to listen, to share in your joys and sorrows, because we all have the right to be respected and to be heard. And if you don't have a sad story like the one I've lived through, please share a happy one. Tell me about a small joy you found today. Please share it with me. That will be a great source of motivation, helping me and everyone watching this to heal, to find faith and purpose in life. If you're watching this on a television, don't hesitate to pick up your phone and search for my channel, Sapphire Revenge. I truly hope to share these feelings with you. Let's build a community where we share our truest emotions. Let's make this a place where we listen to each other, where no woman has to feel like her life, her struggles, and her triumphs are invisible. Thank you again for sitting with me. It means the world.